Hello friends. In this video we're going to be looking at English sentence types. So what do I mean by English sentence types? So in English we have a few different basic sentence types and how we're organizing the sentences. We've got simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. And to understand the difference between a simple, compound, and complex sentence, we really need to understand clauses. So what's a clause? We have two different types of clauses. We've got independent clauses and we have dependent clauses. So an independent clause is kind of like a driver with a driver's license. In the United States, if you have a driver's license, then you can drive the car by yourself. You don't need anybody else in it. However, if you have just a permit, then you have to have another person in the car with you who has a driver's license. So the dependent clause is kind of like a driver with a permit. They can be in the sentence, but they can't be in the sentence by themselves. So the independent clause has a subject plus a verb phrase. So the subject is who or what the sentence is about, and the verb phrase is the verb and anything that comes after that, which we call the predicate. So it's a subject and a predicate. So the verb phrase will have the verb, it might have an object, it might have some adverbs or things like that. So subject and verb phrase, that's an independent clause. For example, I was watching Netflix. This is a complete independent clause because it can be a sentence by itself. So I is the subject, was watching is the verb, and Netflix is the object. Whereas a dependent clause will have some kind of a subordinator plus the subject plus the verb phrase. So it's basically the same as an independent clause, but it has this subordinator. So a subordinator is a word or phrase that makes this clause subordinate to an independent clause. So subordinate means under, sub means under. So this word or phrase makes it so that this clause cannot be by itself. For example, when I was watching Netflix. If I was to say, when I was watching Netflix, this word here, when, is the subordinator. Because I put this word in here, because it's basically the same as the one above, right? I was watching Netflix, I was watching Netflix. But by adding this word to it, then I need more information in order for it to be a complete sentence. Because if I just said, when I was watching Netflix, that is not a complete sentence. Your brain, or the English speaker's brain, is waiting for more information. So if I look at these two, I was watching Netflix and when I was watching Netflix, the first one I can add a period to. The second one is waiting for more. So that's why I have the ... Just like when you're text messaging, right? When somebody's texting you, you see the ... because they're still typing. They're not finished yet. So this first one here, I was watching Netflix, that one is independent. It can be by itself in the sentence. The second one, when I was watching Netflix, is dependent. It means it depends on something else. It needs more information. Okay, so now we can get back to our simple, compound, and complex sentences. What's a simple sentence? A simple sentence is basically one independent clause. It has a subject and it has a verb phrase. For example, I watch Netflix. Here we have our subject, and here we have our verb phrase. Or she watches Amazon Prime. So she is the subject and watches Amazon Prime. This is the verb phrase or the predicate. Neither of us watches Hulu. So neither of us here is the subject and the verb phrase watches Hulu. All of these are complete sentences. Or I like to watch Netflix and eat popcorn. Ooh, this one's a little bit different. So I is the subject, right? Like is a verb, right? I like to watch Netflix. There's a verb phrase. And eat popcorn. There's another verb phrase. So I've got two verb phrases actually. So we have verb phrase 1 and verb phrase 2. But you'll see that I've only got one subject here. So even though there's two verbs, two verb phrases, because there's only one subject, this is still a simple sentence. So this is something to pay attention to when we look at compound sentences. Because compound sentences, they're going to look similar to this, but there's going to be a big difference. So compound sentences include an independent clause, a coordinating conjunction, and another independent clause. So a compound sentence has two independent clauses at least. It can have more than that, but it has to have at least two independent clauses, and they are connected by a coordinating conjunction. So a conjunction is a word that joins two things together. Coordinating means that it's taking two equal things and putting them together. Because these are both independent, it is coordinating. So for example, I watch Netflix and she watches Amazon. So I've taken my sentence, my clause, I watch Netflix, and I've taken another sentence, she watches Amazon. So we have our subject and verb phrase and subject and verb phrase. Both of these can be by themselves. I watch Netflix can be a sentence, and she watches Amazon can be another sentence. But what I've done here is I have connected them together with the word and. So and here is my coordinating conjunction. Or we both watch YouTube, but we don't watch Hulu. So again, we've got our clause here. This is an independent clause. We both watch YouTube, but we don't watch Hulu. So independent clause number one and independent clause number two. And what did I do? I connected them with the word but. So here, but is my coordinating conjunction. Because this one here, we both watch YouTube, that can be a sentence. And we don't watch Hulu, that's another sentence. Or I watch a lot of videos, so I don't get anything done. So again, we have an independent clause. I watch a lot of videos and I don't get anything done. There's another independent clause, and I've connected them with the word so. Okay. So what are the coordinating conjunctions? Because this is what you're looking for. We use this acronym, fanboys, in order to remember the coordinating conjunctions. So an acronym is when we take the first letters of things that usually spell another word. So fanboys. If you remember fanboys, then you can remember the coordinating conjunctions. We've got for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are the coordinating conjunctions. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Now, for, we don't use it as a conjunction a lot. It's kind of an older one or a more formal one. The most common ones you're going to see are and, but, or, and so. So I'll just put a star there. Those are the most common coordinating conjunctions you're going to see. So, complex sentences. Complex sentences are similar to compound sentences, but the big difference is the kind of conjunction that we're using. Actually, we have two kinds of complex sentences. We have adverb ones and adjective ones. So we're going to look at the adverb ones first. So an adverb complex sentence has an independent clause plus a subordinating conjunction. So this is the difference, plus a dependent clause. So it's actually the subordinating conjunction together with the clause that makes it dependent. So a subordinating conjunction, remember sub means under. So it's making this dependent clause work for the independent clause, basically. For example, I watch Netflix while she reads a book. So I watch Netflix. This is my independent clause. She reads a book. This is another clause, but it's connected to the word while. So these are actually connected together. So while she reads a book. Now I can take this out if I want to, and I have a complete sentence. I watch Netflix. But I can't do that to this one, while she reads a book. So that's why this is dependent. This one needs this one here. It depends on this one in order to be a complete sentence. While she reads a book, I watch Netflix. Ooh, look at that. It's the same thing. I watch Netflix while she reads a book. While she reads a book, I watch Netflix. So this is a difference between complex sentences and compound sentences. With complex sentences, we can actually put the dependent clause first. So DC for dependent clause and IC for independent clause. It doesn't really matter what order they go in. What happens is if I put the dependent clause first, then I just put a comma at the end of it. And then I have my independent clause. This is what we also call the main clause. So this is the main clause. So the main clause can come first or it can come second. If it comes second, then we need to have a comma before it here, like that. Now, if we go back to compound sentences, we can't flip them around like that all the time. So if my conjunction is and, then it doesn't matter which one comes first. She watches Amazon Prime and I watch Netflix, but the conjunction has to stay in the middle. We both watch YouTube, but we don't watch Hulu. We can flip these around, but the conjunction has to stay in the middle of the sentence. I watch a lot of videos, so I don't get anything done. Now, because of the word so, if I flip these, then it changes the meaning of the sentence, so I can't do that. But with these complex sentences, I can flip them around, but the conjunction has to stay with the dependent clause. It's like they're glued together. So our subordinating conjunctions, there's actually a lot of them, and I just put some of the most common ones here. Before, after, while, as, because, since, when, although, if, whether, even though, until. Those are just some of the subordinating conjunctions, some of the more common ones you'll see. And again, the subordinating conjunction stays with the dependent clause. Okay, so the other type of complex sentence we have is the adjective one. So an adverb complex sentence is giving us some information about the action in the main clause here. So while she reads a book, I watch Netflix. I watch Netflix is the main clause. So this dependent clause over here is, I'll change my colors here. So this dependent clause is giving me information about the action that's happening in the main clause. It's describing the action in the main clause somehow. So I watch Netflix. The question might be when. When do you watch Netflix? The answer would be while she reads a book. So in an adverb complex sentence, the dependent clause is giving us some information about where, when, why, how the action is happening in the main clause. So the adjective ones are a little bit different. So we've got the independent clause, we've got a relative pronoun, and we have our dependent clause. So that's one difference. Because a complex sentence for adverbs is a subordinating conjunction, whereas with the adjectives, it's a relative pronoun. So it's different words. For example, I like movies that are exciting. So here we have a subject and we have a verb. And here we have another verb, right? But I like movies. We're not saying IR. So IR doesn't make any sense, which means that this verb doesn't go with this subject here. There must be another subject for this verb. So the subject of like is I. What is the subject for are? It's the word that. That are. So that is the subject of are. But really, what is that? What is that talking about? That is talking about movies. So I like movies that are exciting. So the movies are exciting, right? So this word here, the word that, is the relative pronoun. So it's actually doing two jobs. It's working as the subject of this verb, and it's working as the word that's connecting two clauses together. So we call this an adjective complex sentence because this information, I'll use a different color here. We will go with orange. So this information here is describing this noun, because an adjective describes a noun. So in complex sentences that are adjective clauses, the information in the clause is describing some noun in the sentence. Now let's look at this one. The movie that we watched last night was boring. So we've got the movie, which is a subject. We've got watched, which is a verb. We've got was, which is a verb. So the movie is the subject of this verb was. Whereas watched, what is the subject of watched? It is the word we. So that we watched. So that we watched last night, here is my relative pronoun. That's the connecting word. So this relative pronoun is connecting the word movie to we watched last night. So all of this information right here is describing the movie. So what movie did we watch? The one that we watched last night. So we can take all of this out. Just delete it from the sentence. And we have the sentence, the movie was boring. The movie was boring. Which movie? The one that we watched last night. So this clause is giving information about the movie. Now let's look at this one. The movie we watched last night was boring. How is this one different than this one? So look at this one. The movie that we watched last night was boring. Now look at this one. The movie we watched last night was boring. Do you see the difference? The difference is, in the first one, we have the word that. In the second one, we took it out, and the sentence still works. So when we have this subject here, we watched, right? When there's a subject for the verb in the adjective clause, we don't need to use the word that in there. So the movie we watched last night was boring. But again, we watched last night. This is describing the movie. It's doing the same thing. He was the one who recommended that movie. So he, subject, was, verb. The one who recommended. So we've got recommended, which is the verb. And who. Who is the subject of this verb here? So he was who recommended. Now this here, who recommended that movie, is describing the one. So it's describing a noun. So he was the one. He was the one who what? What? Who recommended that movie. So this is describing the one. Okay, so the relative pronouns, these connecting words for adjective compound sentences or complex sentences, the relative pronouns are who, that, and which. So who and that we can use for people when we're describing a person or people. That and which we can use for things. So if what you're describing is a person, you can say who or that. If it's a thing, then we can say that or which. Okay, so let's practice a little bit. I'm going to put some sentences up and you tell me, is it simple, compound, or complex? I'm going to give you a hint. Look for the verbs and the subjects. If you have more than one subject and verb, look for the connecting word. If you only have one subject and one verb, or one subject and two verbs, then you have a simple sentence. Okay, so the verbs. I moved here last year. There's only one verb, moved, and there's one subject, I, which means that this is a simple sentence. Okay, now you try it. You can pause the video and see if you can figure out, is this simple, compound, or complex? All right, so let's look at the verbs. Like, I like the city, but I don't like the weather. And then we have don't like. So we have two verbs. Now, what's the subject of the first verb? It is I. What's the subject of the second verb? It's I. So it's the same person, but in the sentence, it's two different subjects. So I like the city, but I don't like the weather. So I've got two subjects and two verbs. What's the connecting word? It's but. But is a coordinating conjunction, which means that this is a compound sentence. Now look at this one. You can pause the video, see if you can figure out if it's simple, compound, or complex. Okay, so if it's snowing outside, I just stay home. Let's look for the verbs. Is snowing and stay. So what's the subject of is snowing? It's. So we have subject and verb. What's the subject of stay? It is I. So we have two subjects and two verbs. Now, what word is connecting these two subjects and two verbs? It's the word if over here. So if is a subordinating conjunction, which means that this is a complex sentence. Now, remember, if the connecting word is at the beginning of the sentence, then that means it's a complex sentence. All right, is this simple, compound, or complex? You can pause the video and try it on your own. Okay, so let's look for the verbs. In the summer, I like to ride my bike. The word like is a verb. The word to ride is usually a verb, but in this sentence, it's not being used as a verb. It's being used as a noun. So we actually only have one verb. And what's the subject of like? It is I. So we actually only have one subject and one verb, which means that this is a simple sentence. In the winter, I just watch Netflix and stay warm. So is this simple, compound, or complex? You can pause the video if you want to. All right, let's look for the verbs. Watch and stay. Now, what is the subject of watch? I just watch, so I is the subject. And what's the subject of stay? Oh, I is also the subject of stay. So I is the subject of watch, and I is also the subject of stay. Just this one word here, which means we only have one subject, even though we have two verbs, which means that this is a simple sentence. All right, is it simple, compound, or complex? You can pause the video if you want to. I want to live in a place that is warm all year. So let's look for the verbs. Want. Again, to live, it looks like a verb, but it's not being used as a verb in the sentence because it has the word to there. So I want to live in a place that is warm all year. So is also a verb. So want is a verb. What is the subject of want? It is I. Now we have the verb is. What is the subject of is? It is the word that. Okay, so we have subject, verb, subject, verb. Now look at what is the connecting word here. If we have two subjects and two verbs, what's the connecting word? The connecting word here is the word that. And that is a relative pronoun. So that means that this is a complex sentence because that is warm all year is describing the noun place. So I want to live in a place. What kind of a place? A place that is warm all year. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and I hope it makes the sentence types in English a little bit clearer.